Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and give about another minute for everyone to join, and we'll be starting shortly. Thanks again. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I should be a familiar face if you have joined our previous series. My name is Anna Freshu, and so I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. This is the fourth session of Academy's Adaptive Mindset series. I'm the Director of Strategic Alliances at Academy. And so for those of you who were unable to attend our last webinar, the series was titled The War Against Distraction, Mastering Your Myopia and the Myth of Willpower. And that was hosted by Dr. Omid Fatoui. These recordings are all on the original website, and we will be sure to include a link in the chat. You guys will also be hearing from us afterwards via email, where you'll be able to access all of the series and all of the recordings. Today, we're going to be discussing Principles in Practice session, creating your own personal philosophy. And so I'm honored to introduce Dr. Omid Fatoui. Dr. Omid Fatoui has been with us since day one of these series. You may also recall my colleagues Chelsea and Reshma. They will not be joining us today, but we do appreciate their participation and the framework that they've also helped create when we were creating these series to host. So this is our final series. We will be hosting more webinars in the future, so feel free to keep an eye out for us, and I'm sure you guys will receive more emails from us regarding those webinars. But without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Omid Fatoui for those of you who are not familiar with him. He serves as a research associate at the Learning Research Development Center based at the University of Pittsburgh. And he's also the Director for Learning and Innovation at WGU Labs. So Omid helped co-found the College Transition Collaboration at Stanford University, which is one of the largest multi-institution collaborations to deliver proven psychological interventions to over 40,000 students, as well as the Stanford Intervention Lab, a collaboration research group committed to sharing and scaling proven insights from psychology to promote better performance and well-being. He spends most of his time translating actionable research insights into practice through intervention design and evaluation, presentations, and training tailored to specific groups. So we do encourage you guys to ask questions during the chat. Please feel free to place your comments there. My colleague Jeannie will also be monitoring the comments with any questions and make sure that Omid does get to address some of these questions. So thank you again for joining this session, and I'm going to turn it over to Omid. Omid, take it away.
Thank you for that warm introduction. Always a pleasure to be here and share with you and try to represent a little bit of a glimpse into what Academy does really well by uncovering and unrooting some of the core and most active elements of that work. As some of you may know, I'm a social psychologist by training, but I'm also a deep philosopher of life and thinking about the strategies, the ones most likely to be proven, that really can help to elevate our individual and collective impact in the world. Now, I said that as the backdrop of context, because what we'll be doing today is challenging some critical ideas and assumptions. And this is actually meant to be an interactive session, so be prepared to be involved and contribute, because we're going to be spending a good part of this time in some idea generation, and content sharing that each of you will be supporting. With that, let's jump in. As you know, just general layout and protocol for the event. This is a recorded session, so feel free to free yourself of any notes or the feeling that you have to jot everything down. The recording will be available and shared with you. There is a Q&A window of time that we've allocated at the end where we can do a deeper dive and a free-flowing conversation. In order to be able to capture and really spend some time on those questions and conversation, I encourage you all to type in your questions and your thoughts in the chat throughout our time today, and don't wait till the end to make sure that your thoughts are articulated, so that you don't forget those. We have moderators and facilitators who will be scanning the chat, and then we'll make sure that we address as many of those questions as we can. But again, I want to just remind you that this session is meant to be a little bit more interactive, a little bit more hands-on, and hopefully we can have our own individual sort of reflection time into this. If you joined us in the past, you'll probably have seen this framework that looks at performance broadly and the factors that impede performance or that lead to underperformance. And in a very generalized way, I've categorized those domains of barriers as domains of stress, so the factors that impact your arousal state, your focus, your cognitive resources to be able to focus in that moment. Another broad domain is the domain of threats, psychological threat, in terms of your perceptions of efficacy and adequacy, and how you feel like you are viewed by others, and how that plays into your ability to perform at key moments. And third is the state of rest. Sometimes our performance depends on us being able to stay motivated and engaged when we're sort of not in the thick of things, when we are at home and we know we should be doing some work, or in the office and no one's around and there's social media in the background. How is it that we can focus our time and our energy in a way that is optimal for performance as well? Now, these are all based on one core assumption, and I want to make sure that I'm not making misattributions about those assumptions. So I'm going to begin with the first question. And the question is for you all, albeit seemingly simple. I would like you to just sort of reflect on this really quickly and answer. Who thinks it's important to perform? Who wants to be a high performer? And either with a raise of hands or a quick chat response, if you could just type in if that is something that you think is relevant to you. If you think you do want to be a high performer or that's important to you, then go ahead and please in the chat say I or me or yes or whatever is the appropriate response. If the answer is no, then please similarly feel free to answer this question. But I don't want to spend the rest of our time based on false assumptions. And one of those assumptions being that we all want to be high performers. The other assumption I would say is that we even know what performance and high performance is. So exactly, great question. The last response is depends on the definition of high performance. So let me ask you this question. What is high performance to you? How would you define it? Again, in the chat, if you'll take a few seconds here, and you don't have to feel rushed. We'll take the time and the space to really think through what it means. But as you think about what high performance means, if you answered that yes, it is important, well, what does that look like? What does that mean to be a high performer? So if you could, just in a few words or a few sentences, define what you think high performance means. Seeing some responses, productivity, accomplishing the things I need to do each day to the best of my ability. So fulfilling your potential, good grades and successful in my career, high quality and high output. It's the best that one can do at their ability within certain situations. It's adaptability in an adverse situation. Achieve beyond expectations. It's an external recognition of an internal commitment to give your best. I like that one. It's very nice. For me, it's a feeling of high performance, means feeling I've done well or acceptable amount of work towards my best. Meeting expectations to progress and match my values, doing things I need to do and finish everything, exceeding expected impact, putting forth best effort, and fulfilling the job to the best of one's ability. So I'm seeing a lot of responses that's happened on a few domains, and if you'll indulge me, I'll sort of untangle those. One of which has to do with sort of a performance metric that objectively one is delivering on a set of outcomes that is of value either to the self or others. Other aspects that I see popping up in the responses here, which I really appreciate, have to do with alignment with my potential. So being able to arrive at or even potentially exceed my current threshold or closer to my full potential. And then others mentioned topics like or themes like values, things I care about. So it's interesting that you've hit on these three dimensions, and I really just want to invite you to think about these various dimensions as we talk about the rest of this session today, because as we think about performance, indeed, all of these dimensions are important. And I really just want to push the boundaries a little bit as well. So if you think of different examples of high performance, does a high performance metric mean that you are the best in the world? Is that what it means to be a high performer? Does it mean that you are doing your best at all times? Does it mean that you are pushing yourself to do uncomfortable things? Does it mean to do things that you think are of value and meaning to yourself or others? And I'm certainly not here to suggest that I know the answers to these things. My only hope is that as you think about performance and you think about what it means to you, that you be crystal clear on what high performance is and to what outcome, to what goal. Why is it that performance matters? For a 3-year-old who's learning how to skateboard, they will fail and fail again. Does that mean that that is not high performance? I'm pretty sure that many of you will agree that, yeah, even trying over and over again and failing at something that you care about can be categorized as high performance. But unfortunately, while in this sort of explicit exercise, we can challenge ourselves to think more critically about these domains of performance and what it means, it's not always the message that we're sent from our world, our lives, and the society that we live in. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there's a bit of an implicit broken model that we all operate under. The assumptions that performance means delivering on outcomes, and that the value of an individual is equated to how much performance they can deliver. You'll probably know this and have felt this implicitly or explicitly as you've looked at your work evaluations, your grades, how you do in your relationships, how you do in your personal relationships, and your own personal aspirations. You sort of put this metric of success as being defined by whether you achieve a particular goal or not. And then importantly, but often subtly, we also internalize our own self-worth by the sum total of how much performance we're able to successfully deliver on. And this is important to pause on because as we think about core motivations for why we do the things we do, it's important to reflect on what it is that's driving us and what it is that is really the core of our engine, the core of our fire that sustains our self-concept. If we aren't fully sort of aligned with what we want to do in a way that is meaningful to us, then the metrics of evaluation will be externally driven. And that also feeds into how you see yourself and in turn, what you contribute to. But unless you're able to recognize that there are these invisible forces out there that put pressure on us to deliver and invest time and effort into domains that may or may not be fully aligned with who we are and who we want to be, and that even aspects of evaluation and self-evaluation are driven by, again, these external forces, and that unfortunately, if you'll consider and potentially accept my proposal, that these models are broken, where they equate value of a person with just how much performance they're able to deliver. And with those two foundational assumptions in full sight, hopefully we can then create a new framework, a framework that's meaningful and that drives true behavior progress in a way that is sustainable for us. But it's important to shed light on these implicit and invisible forces so that we can then move into what we hope is a more productive life. Now, as we think about productivity, I think we can all agree that productivity includes some form of behavior, some form of action, some form of engagement, some form of effort. And yet, in many circumstances, when we look outward at others or in society or even ourselves, we know that there is a chronic history of inaction. And so I'll very, very quickly go over a brief summary of what some of the core factors of inaction tend to be, so that we again understand who are the enemies. We have a visibility of what the forces are that hold us back are, so that we can then target those forces and be more intentional to optimize our performances. The first one, and I will say there are basically three, and I actually frame these both as the forces of inaction, but also enemies of living, right? Because at the end of the day, living means being agentic, living means being engaged, living means doing and being in a way that is meaningful. And I'm intentional with both dimensions of doing and being because, as I mentioned earlier, being isn't equated by how much doing you do. In fact, I would challenge and sort of encourage us to think about being and doing as separate, potentially equally important, but not as connected and not as an indication of the other, that you are not of the person you are based on how much you do or don't do, and vice versa. You shouldn't be doing the things based on the things that you are not. I think there's some sort of understanding of how these things interoperate. But that being said, what are the common enemies of living and doing? Being, essentially. And those fall into three broad categories. The first one has to do with anxiety. What is anxiety and how does it affect all of us? I wonder with a show of hands, either in the chat or with raising your hand function, which by the way is something that I encourage you to maybe practice at this point. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see sort of a smiley face icon with a plus sign to the right side of it. If you tap on that, you're going to see a raise hand function. And that's how we're going to be asking you to participate later in the conversation. But maybe for now, as a practice, if any of you agree with the fact that at times anxiety has riddled your life or impacted your life in a negative way, with a show of hands, virtual hands, please let me know if that's relevant for you. Not sure that I'm able to see the hands. Oh, there we go. I'm seeing them now. Yes, perfect. So I'm seeing a number of people who actually do acknowledge that anxiety is something that they've experienced and that it impacts their lives. Another seemingly related but not quite the same is critical self-talk. And then a final one is the complexity or the pulls of demands in our lives that pull us away from the areas that we think are most meaningful. And today, one of the goals that we have is both to identify what these impeding or barriers are in our lives, and then to create some space to have an intentional destination and approach to the things that are meaningful to us. And this is a very subjectively driven kind of conversation. But as I mentioned, the first thing we'll do is identify some of the barriers to performance. Here, what I'm showing you is a graph of the percentage of people in the world based on country who have nominated to be organ donors. You may have seen this graph before in one of our past presentations, but it's one that's relevant still till today. Because one of the observations you'll have right away is that there seems to be a pretty starkly big difference between certain countries where the yellow bars are relatively low numbers or percentages of populations that become organ donors, compared to some of the blue bars where it's almost a ceiling effect, nearly the entire population being willing to make this life-saving act. And the question that comes to mind is why the stark difference? And some possible reasons is that maybe there are individual or collective or cultural differences between the people in one set of countries compared to the other. But from a psychological perspective, we actually know that it's something much more simple, and specifically has nothing to do with the internal person, but with the way that the question is asked. And essentially, when do you get to nominate whether you're an organ donor? It's when you go to fill out your license, your driving license. And at the back of that form, they ask, do you want to be an organ donor? Now, in one set of studies, the ones in the yellow, that's exactly how they frame that question. They say, check here if you want to be an organ donor. Now, in the other studies, in the other countries with the blue bars, they ask that same question, but in a slightly reformatted way. And the question is posed, check here if you do not want to be an organ donor. Interestingly enough, the behavior is identical across all countries, which is that almost everyone does not check that box. And the reason is not because they're selfish. It's not that they don't care. It's not that they don't see the importance of this behavior, but it's just about the fact that in the moment when they're asked that question, they have a lot going on. They've got to figure out their driving situation. They probably have been waiting in line for a long time and they have competing demands. And they know that it's an important and potentially complicated decision to make. So in that moment, the complexity is what leads most people to saying, I'm not going to make this decision right now. Not to say that I don't want to make it, but in this moment right now, I'm not going to make that decision. I'll come back to it. But they never do. And that's because of a number of other factors. And the result is we have these incredibly discrepant levels of organ donation from one set of countries compared to another. This is one of the factors, the enemies of productivity that I wanted to highlight. And hopefully, as you think about examples in your own life, you can identify one or two situations. The other domain has to do with how we talk to ourselves. Now, sometimes we don't even pay attention to how we talk to ourselves, but if at times we did, and I wonder if this is true for you as well, and you asked yourself, what is the tone and tenor of my own speech to myself? And imagine, if you will, that you actually have a relationship with yourself. Now, in speaking to yourself as though you are in a relationship with somebody else, do you think that the other person would be happy? Do you think that they would tolerate the way you talk to them, the way you think about them? And my sort of bold hypothesis here is that, like me, probably many of you are actually pretty critical with the way that you talk to yourself at times. And that if you were to imagine that that person that you're talking to is indeed someone that you're in a relationship with, chances are that person would not stick around. And yet you accept the fact that you will talk to yourself in this way without questioning whether this is healthy and sustainable. So thinking about and reflecting on and becoming aware of that self-talk is also one of the strategies that we'll be exploring. Um, and the third sort of challenge to productivity is the fact that while we may have the best of intentions, we actually have very little slack and space to be able to forecast and plan and anticipate the upcoming challenges in our lives. Now, here you see three pictures. Imagine yourself being asked the following question. If I had to, or if you had to, choose which of these three pictures you wanted to be dropped into, would it be this bottom left here where the waters seem pretty still? Would it be the top left where the waters are pretty choppy? Or would it be this full-on waterfall, right? And I'm guessing that probably many of you would say, I'd much rather be dropped into this calm, still water, because then I would have some control. Then I would be able to swim away from whatever impending and looming dangers might be coming my way. With this still water in this sort of, under low pressure, I have the freedom to be able to exert some control. Now, interestingly enough, these are actually all images of the same waterfall, the Niagara Falls. They're just at different distances from the falls themselves. And as we think about our lives and how much leverage we have in our decisions, of course, the further away you are from the fall itself, the sooner you're able to sort of swim away and close to shore and get yourself out of danger's way, the easier it will be. And yet, many of us don't really actually operate that way. Many of us will only respond when we start to see and hear the falls coming, which has to do with more of the choppy waters. And like many waterfalls, there's an incredible amount of pressure and force that can pull you into that impending disaster because it's all too late when you've actually realized it. And so, where I'm going with this is that many of us actually operate life this way. We are in these still waters, knowing that there's a waterfall around the corner, but not really taking appropriate or timely action until the danger is looming. In many ways, our species has evolved by being able to react and respond to immediate threats and rewards. And we talked about during our last session. But in many ways, it's actually failing us because when things are calm or when it matters the most, we are not able to leverage our cognitive resources to take the action that we need. And my goal, hopefully, is to maybe get us to carve out the space and the time right now to speak and be able to put down some strategies that keeps us away from that impending waterfall. I will say that with Academy, that they have actually created a program that very intentionally addresses all three of these challenges. The first one that Academy does very well is in providing coaching. And coaching that is based on motivational interviewing, where it isn't externally driven, but really is a conversation where you're allowed to arrive at solutions and strategies that are most effective for you. And all through that, being guided by an expert who knows exactly how to allocate time and resources and tools to help you navigate the challenges that you want. In those coaching experiences, the Academy also creates the space so that you're able to put in the resources and put in the strategies before you get to that impending waterfall. That preparation in advance of the challenges is exactly one of the reasons why solutions like coaching work really well. And as I've mentioned, in this very sort of non-intrusive way, motivational interviewing is one of the ways that the Academy leverages this opportunity to help individuals navigate their ways around. Another strategy that Academy also employs and that I think is relevant for all of us is mindfulness practice. Unfortunately, this is one of those terms that in recent years has become a bit cliche. It's like, yeah, I know mindfulness is great. Just close your eyes, breathe, yada, yada, yada. That's great and dandy, but hopefully you'll, actually think about and reflect on the fact that mindfulness has two core pillars that in combination will address and target one of the foundational issues that we've sort of laid out in this discussion today, which is that we live in a harsh world based on a broken model that leads to negative self-talk. And that oftentimes we're sort of all being swept away by the demands of life that we rarely actually take a pause to reflect on how it is that we speak to ourselves. And so where mindfulness comes in as an effective practice is that it creates the space and the practice to be able to raise your awareness about your own inner dialogue, your own inner chatter, and in a very non-judgmental way allows you to find an acceptance of how it is that you're experiencing, you're feeling, you're thinking, and basically making progress in your life. And without that intentional practice, I think our tendency is to have that very critical thought and tone to the way that we reflect on ourselves and our lives. So mindfulness is extremely powerful. In fact, when you look at who actually continues to practice mindfulness with full fidelity, it's actually the top performers in their fields, the top executives, the top athletes, because they know the importance of being present in the moment with access to their full resources and attention. And mindfulness is basically like a training program. It's like the day-to-day squats and jumps and reps that's needed um, in advance of the actual moments where you need them the most. And so this practice, this training, gets you prepared to perform in times of high stress and high consequence. And really, at the core is this combination of being able to create spaces and practices that gives you more connection with you, an awareness of your internal thoughts, and an acceptance of how to really incorporate that narrative and that internal talk in a way that doesn't boggle you down too much. As I've mentioned, the Academy does touch on both the coaching and the mindfulness pretty well. And so I'm not going to belabor that too much. I will say that students who go through that program really do appreciate that experience, and it's thoughtfully designed. What I want to do in our very limited time today is on another thing that I think is critically important, which is to articulate and define a strategy that will help you to set your sails, that will help you to identify that looming waterfall, and then make sure that you know how to react in advance of when the danger is imminent. And so for the rest of our time, we're going to be co-creating our own personal philosophies. And I will be turning it to you to spend some time crafting and drafting what is your own personal philosophy, with the hopes that by the end of this session, you will walk away with that philosophy articulated and written down to take out into your own lives and hopefully apply them to the challenges and difficulties and the events that occur to you and with you as you navigate this thing called life. As I've mentioned, I hope that as we think about the philosophies, that we're able to detach that from this notion that philosophies are meant to be a tool for increased productivity because that is the basis of your value. I hope that maybe you can take a deeper, more critical perspective on how to create and think about that philosophy. And the way that I encourage you to think about that is really thinking about the things that matter to you, right? One way to do that, and we're going to walk through a strategy of how you craft this philosophy, because probably you haven't been told how to do that or shown how to do that. But my hope is to sort of walk through step by step how it is that we can start to generate a personal philosophy that will follow us for days and weeks and years to come. And the first step is basically thinking about the people that you value the most, the people that you respect the most. For the next 10 seconds or so, I just want you to sort of either close your eyes or imagine the people, either historical or personal, the ones in your life that you know, who have had or who seem to have the greatest impact and have the kind of life that you think is meaningful. Who are they, and what do they stand for? Just think about them. You don't have to do anything at this point. Visualize as many of them that come to mind. And as you do that, and there's a visual population of people that come to mind, what I'd like you to do now, either in the chat or on a piece of paper or on a separate document on your computer, is write down all of the words that come to mind that you think captures and represents these people. And it doesn't have to be one, it can be one. If it's a number of people and there are words that basically summarize and capture all of their essence, that's great. If there are distinct words that you think capture each unique person, then write those down too. But we're going to take maybe just a few minutes here and give you the time to jot down all of the words that come to mind when you think about the people in your life who matter most to you. Again, it can be representatives, symbolic or historical individuals, or it can be people that you actually know. And as you think about those people, what are the words that come to mind? Is it words like respect, integrity, love, compassion, impact? All of the words that come to mind: loving, caring, kind, and encouraging. I would encourage you to sort of default to using the chat. I think that way, not only are you able to add this own contribution to your own thinking, but hopefully that you feel safe enough to share that with others as well, because they might be struggling to think about the right words, and your contribution might be exactly what they need. They might be looking for that word that you have. But if you're not comfortable, that's completely fine too. We will be asking you to share out at some point what your philosophies are, but right now we're just going through step by step some of the words that capture those for you. So spend another 30 seconds or so. I'll stop talking, give you the silence that you need, but please go ahead and write down all the words that come to mind as you think about those people that you respect and value that matter to you in your life. Yeah, I'm seeing some really great contributions coming in. I encourage you to continue to jot those down. Um, I appreciate and really I'm thankful for your willingness to cooperate and participate in this. I think this really is an exercise that ultimately only serves you, and to the extent that you have allocated the time to be here, I would encourage you to take and make the most out of this time. And while I make no guarantees, I can certainly share that my personal experience is that when I've walked through this exercise, I've left with something that has been invaluable to me and in my life. So we're seeing some great contributions now as we've thought about these words that represent basically the world and the people that matter and seem to really capture something that we think is meaningful. We're going to turn that into a self-focused representation now. As we think about how it is that we craft our own personal philosophies, looking at the menu of words that you've jotted down, maybe they're all there, maybe some are missing, but try to identify or pick some of those words that you think are meaningful to you. And the important thing here is that it has to be true for you. And this is important, but very, very subtle, is that as you think about the values that, or the words that you think are valuable, be very intentional with making sure that these are truly intrinsically driven and not by what you think your mom thinks or your husband thinks or your wife thinks or your children thinks or what society thinks is important. But what is it that matters to you? What are the words that, as you think about what you align with, um, what are the words that you would say best capture who you are and who you want to be? And I'll take a few seconds here, maybe 30 seconds. And if you're equally, willing to share in the chat and articulate the words that you think capture who you want to be and who you align with in terms of the values and characteristics and descriptions, then again, feel free to leverage the chat. And this is actually a bit of a challenging part because I think in many ways it's easier to think about other people, but when it comes to a reflection of the self, that's something we don't get asked to do very often. And it's almost uncomfortable because it's like, oh, am I just boasting and am I bragging? Am I just trying to like come across as being, in a positive light? But again, I want to challenge you to think about this time, the space as only for you. And certainly while you're sharing this with the rest of us, what you leave with is only for you, and no one else is going to reflect on that in any way. So thinking about the words that you've listed and thinking about what you align with, who you are as a person, who you want to be as a person. What are the words that best capture and represent who you are? And we'll take a few seconds just to do that again. And if you're comfortable putting it in the chat, I would encourage you because I do think that others really do draw some benefit from that. But if you're doing this elsewhere, that's completely fine as well. I will say one thing as we're engaging in this work, which is that one of the goals of this broader activity is once we have clarity on who we are and what we align with, what is our own personal philosophy, a byproduct is that we actually see a lot more engagement, a lot more volunteering of that energy and of that contribution to the world. And so when we find ourselves in situations where someone asks, can you contribute? Can you be part of this? You have clarity about whether or not this is something that you do align with or don't. And with that comes no shame in either taking a step back and saying, no, thank you. But there equally comes no shame in putting yourself forward and saying, this is something I want to be seen for. This is something that I want to be building in my own life. This is something, an area of contribution that I think is really meaningful and aligns with who I am. And so I will not hesitate to step up and share and contribute. And your willingness to share this in the chat, either with yourself or with others, is actually a small sort of micro representation of what it's like in the world, because you will be asked throughout life to step up and contribute. And if it aligns with who you are, if you think it's meaningful, then you will. If it doesn't, then you will have that same reaction of saying, maybe not right now. And you'll come up with a lot of stories for why that's the case. Maybe you'll say, I don't know that it's this is fully perfect yet. It's not quite ready yet. I haven't had enough time to really think about it. But if you know that this is something that does align with who you are, then you'll just put it out, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not great, even if it's not finished. And that's one of the byproducts of this work. That once you have clarity in who you are and what you stand for, then when situations arise, you know how to represent yourself. You know how to show up consistently and overwhelmingly clearly. And that really is one of the goals of what we're trying to do. So hopefully by now you've come up with a number of words that you think represent the things that are meaningful and what you align with. And now what we're going to try to do is to put those together into a singular phrase or a couple of phrases. Now, again, these forcing functions are not meant to be easy. Our goal with the sequential process is to help with this process, but as we think about summarizing the meaning of our lives in a singular sentence, you're like, whoa, 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 that's a lot. But even if it's imperfect, my argument is that beginning somewhere with some articulation of the things that you think are meaningful and do represent who you are is exactly the foundational start that we need, so that as you move forward through this life filled with ambiguity, you at least have that bit of clarity. And this will be a basis that you will use to refine and revisit over and over and over again. And I encourage you to do that. But as a starting point, if we have that phrase, that statement of what it is that you align with the most, your philosophical statement, then that will be the basis that allows for that revision. But absent that, I think, unfortunately, you'll still be pulled by life's demands and life's directions. But what we're doing today is we're putting the stake in and putting the stamp on what it is that we think is meaningful in our lives. So the next challenge for you is take the words that you just contributed and put them into a sentence that you think is meaningful in terms of who you are. And I'll give you a bit more guidance on how to do that. So, and we'll spend a bit of time doing this. But as you're thinking about all the words that you generated, you want to try to come up with a statement or two in terms of, again, how you align, what you align with the most. And these can be statements that begin with who I am or what I do or what impact I work towards, and then fill in the sentence, you know? And I'll give you an example of my own. This is something that I've created and revisited and revised over the years, but ultimately, if I had to really think about my contribution and what it is that I align with most in my life, it is with the following statement: that I am committed to contributing to a community of people that is devoted to growth. That defines through and through every single thing I do. And if something that comes across my table doesn't align with this philosophical perspective, it's easy for me to say no because I have clarity on what that is. The reason why I'm here with you all today, volunteering my time when I have a full-time job, is because this opportunity to connect with you and to work with you does align with my core philosophical perspective. And so now the challenge is for you is to think about, if I had to put in a sentence or two what it is that I align with, what is my philosophical statement, and using the list of words that you came up with, please spend a few minutes trying to generate that. And again, if you can take advantage of the chat, I think we would all be appreciative. Um, but we'll spend a couple of minutes just right now in that deep reflection. This is hard work, but my hope is that at the end of this sort of grappling and wrestling with a phrase that you think captures you, who you are and what you align with, that you will be able to take that with you. So we'll take a few minutes of silence as your sentences become formed or semi-formed. Feel free to take advantage of the chat. You know, what you put out there doesn't have to be a final product, but certainly feel free to take advantage of it. And again, I encourage you to recognize that this is a space where there are no ulterior motives for the work that you're doing, other than being able to generate something that is of value to you. So, in terms of how you feel like you're being perceived, whether you think it's being viewed in a way that's boastful, or you might be embarrassed to share something that you're not fully ready to, um, the progress can't be made unless you're willing to take that step forward. And hopefully, once you have taken that step forward with the clarity, then you'll also have some insight into what it is that was holding you back, or is holding you back. And just reading some of the ones that are coming in. I will mention that after a few minutes, we're going to have a free flowing conversation. We're going to ask some people to come off of mute, share with us what they wrote. And with some of my guidance, we might help with the revision process because, as I mentioned, what you generate today is only a first draft. And I would encourage all of us to revisit and revise these personal philosophy statements over and over again in our lives as they need to be. And I'll sort of walk through what that process of revision looks like. We'll give everyone one more minute. And if you're still struggling, I'll give you one last bit of strategic help here in terms of how it is that you can define your personal statements. And it's a visualization activity where basically, if you're trying to grapple with the words to use, imagine the conversation you would be having if you were sort of standing at the end of your life and opposite you was sitting your child, whether you have one or not, just imagine that person sitting across from you. And in a few words and sentences, you're trying to convey to them what your life was about. What is it that you stood for? What kind of impact do you hope to have? What is it that you aligned your life with? And thinking about that audience and the words you would use, what would that personal philosophy be? Okay. Um, so now we're going to get some sort of conversation happening. I'm going to be inviting people to raise their hands. And as I mentioned, with the little icon at the bottom of your screen, the happy face with this plus sign, if you go ahead and click raised hand or any sort of emoticon, then our moderators will be able to screen for people who want to volunteer. And what I'm going to be asking you to do is basically share with us what your personal philosophy is. And then we'll spend a couple of minutes just thinking about intentionally how it is that was drafted and ways that we can maybe do some minor revisions and look into the process of revising those um, if that's relevant. So if you're comfortable, I'm looking for some volunteers to speak up and share with us.
If you can raise your hand, by the way, that way I can help you to unmute yourself. That'd be great. Okay. Clarice Thomas. By the way, when you're unmuted, you'll be able to speak freely.
No, your sound is not coming through. Hmm. Yeah. I apologize for the technical issues. Is it Clarice? If it is Clarice, maybe you can just share in the chat what your own personal statement was. And I actually see it right here at the bottom. My apologies. So if you're okay, we'll sort of have a chat-based interaction. This platform is not very conducive to an oral conversation. But I'm reading yours, and it says, I'm driving myself to be intelligent and thoughtful with my time and actions, being kind to myself and others, and loving God, others, and myself to the best of my ability. So Clarice, if you can see us, or sorry, if you can hear us, I'm wondering if you can do just a moment of reflection and looking at that phrase, if you could volunteer, which of the words stand out the most as being the most important to you as you look at that phrase? And I'm hoping that others are sort of taking this um, as a method of really reflecting on your statements with the hopes of being honing in and refining your own statements as well. But as you're thinking about your statement and you're looking at the words, what are the words, or what is the word that really resonates the most with you as you look at that phrase? I'm hoping you can hear us, Clarice. If you can, just maybe let us know. Again, apologize for the technical issues here. Perfect. Yes, thank you. You think the word that stands out the most is my phrase are thoughtfulness and kindness. Interesting. And so something about um, thoughtfulness and kindness is what really sort of aligns itself most with who you are and what impact. And I'm wondering again, Clarice, if you'd be willing, why is it that those two words come to mind? And I wonder if you had to place an order, is it thoughtfulness or kindness that you would prioritize as coming first? Would you say that is it thoughtfulness or kindness that you connect with and resonate with most? So thoughtfulness is the deepest sense of the word. But like I put immense amounts of thought into what I do and say. I think thoughtfulness would be first because in my mind, kindness flows from that thoughtfulness, if that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So for you, it's a strong alignment around being intentional and being thoughtful with how you express yourself and communicate with yourself and others. And I think that's a really nice sort of centering in, as you're probably all sort of capturing and seeing with what we're doing here is as you create these personal statements, these personal philosophies, what you want them to be is as succinct and as compact as possible so that when you articulate that to yourself and others, you have that core resonance and alignment with it. And at times when we begin with our first draft, There are a lot of components, but if we engage in this exercise on honing in on the one or two most active elements and then build out a very succinct statement around that key expression or that key experience, then we're getting closer to a very clear, succinct, impactful philosophical statement. And the reason why it's important that it be succinct is that you want to be able to apply that in a day-to-day experience quite readily. And that clarity will really help to center what decisions you make, whether you do or don't engage with things. And if there's super clear understanding of who you are and how you align with yourself and in the world, then that will give you the better clarity about the actions and investments you want to make. So as you all think about your own personal statements that you've so generously shared and crafted here, take a second to really reflect on what core elements of this statement do I resonate with the most, and then how do I truncate that into a statement that I think I can share quickly, steadily, and repeatedly in a way that I think is meaningful. Of course, this is just, again, the basis. If we had 4 days, which sometimes is how long it takes to really do this in a thoughtful way with revisions and contemplation, then we would be able to leave our time together with a clear sense of philosophical statement. My hope and invitation is that you all take this as a starting point and continue to refine your own personal philosophies as you go out and explore the rest of your lives. But with that, I'm mindful of time. I do want to thank you all for your incredible, candid demeanors and willingness to be able to share with us. I really do appreciate it. I'm always really enriched by hearing and seeing how people really do align on things that are of true meaning and significance in life, and not just these externally driven rewards and outcomes that society pushes on us. So in many ways, I drive the energy, and this is why I do the work that I do. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, I'd encourage you to pull out your phones. On the left, you're going to see a QR code that connects you to my LinkedIn page. I'd love to stay connected. On the right, you're going to see a QR code that takes you to the Academy webpage, where you can basically understand more about that program and how you can connect with those. But with that, I'll pause and pass it back to Anna.
Thank you so much, Omid. I want to thank you again for all your time that you've contributed for this series. I want to thank all the participants, especially those who have been with us since day one. And then I want to thank also our colleagues, Reshma and Chelsea, who also were a part of creating this webinar series. I want to thank Jeannie and Aaron, they're the behind the scenes, but thanks to them, we're here as well. So thank you, all of you. Omid put two great codes up here for you guys to stay connected with us. I also put my email in the chat. We do invite you to reach out to us, Omid and Academy. We are available for further trainings, for partnerships with employers, organizations, etc. So if you see that there's an opportunity to take some of what you've learned and kind of incorporate it into the companies you're working for, the organizations that you support, we'd love to hear from you. All right. Well, thank you again. We hope you stay well, and we look forward to seeing you during our next webinar series. Thanks, everybody.